There we go. All right. I think we're good. Let's get into this. Here we got some questions already. This is from Keith. Excited about this. Can you explain fasting, especially in the context of Yom Kippur, not eating or drinking to include water afflicting the soul? That's a great question, Keith. And the whole idea of fasting comes from, as you said, afflicting the soul. And if we go back to Psalm chapter 34, that is where we find this idea that afflicting the soul and fasting are actually related to one another. Now, this shouldn't come as a really big surprise because I don't know about you, but I kind of enjoy eating. I think it's rather pleasurable to eat. And so then the idea is that we're going to do things that are, well, outside of our norm. They're going to be not as they're not the typical thing, and we're going to take time and not do what we normally do. So let me bring this up. I think this is in Psalm 34, if my memory serves me. So Psalm 34, we have my soul makes its boast in the Lord, the humble shall hear of it and be glad. And let me keep on going here. Let's see here. Let me see if I can find the term there, afflict. I know it is in the scriptures. I might have the wrong passage though. So let me go ahead and look that up because I can't quite place the passage, but it's in there somewhere. So, but again, when Yom Kippur comes, think of it like this. Let's say you get in trouble with the principal and your dad goes in. He's going to go and get you out of trouble because you know that you're in big trouble. If your dad doesn't save the day, you're in big trouble, right? And so the question is, what are you going to be doing while your dad's in there up to bat to try to get you out of a tight spot? I mean, should you be playing video games while he's doing that? Or should you maybe do something a little bit more, shall we say, just kind of heart searching, that something that really shows that you're not trying to brush this off, but you're trying to you're trying to kind of sympathize and sense what you did that got you in all this trouble, and now your dad's having to go through all this trouble to get you out of that place. And so that's the idea, is that while the Lord has been taking care of the problem that we've gotten ourselves into, then are we going to just be partying while he's doing that, while he's paying the ultimate price? Are we going to party, or are we going to kind of do some soul searching and saying, boy, the Lord has done so much for me. Would I really would it be right of me to do this in light of all that he's done? And so I think that's kind of the idea, is that we want to take time to get outside of our regular place and get into what the Lord has for us. So I have to apologize. I am not able to find that passage. I know it's in the book of Psalms, and it's kind of annoying that I'm not able to find that, but let me keep searching for it. And there's another thing, of course, there's also the idea that we don't enter in marital relations. We don't, we're just not going to go to the movies. So it's not only fasting, but we're fasting from the regular pleasurable kind of stuff. Okay, it was Psalm 35. I was not too far off, right? So here we go. Psalm 35, verse 13. But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled myself with fasting, and my prayer would return to my own heart. So that's the passage that I was trying to find. There's another one in Psalm 69, verse 10. When I wept and chastened my soul with fasting, that became my approach. So in both of these passages, the idea of humbled or afflicting is we think of humble that I don't know, you're proud versus humble. But here in the Hebrew, it's the word ana with an ayin, and it's the same word as afflict. So to humble and afflict are actually the same word in Hebrew, at least in this particular case. There's other words for humble, but this is one of the words for humble. So humble and afflict can mean the same thing. And so the idea is that when you humble yourself or you afflict your soul, uh, it goes hand in hand with fasting. So we see that again in Psalm 35, verse 13, and we also see it in Psalm 69, verse 10. Again, when I wept and chastened my soul with fasting. So that is the idea behind not eating on that day. And I think it's a very meaningful thing because we're taking a whole day to not eat, to really think about all that Jesus did. And, let's do it again when we come up to Passover. Now, for many of us, Passover is a very much of a celebratory time, and for good reason. But it's also a time when we remember what the Lord did for us, that he had to bleed and die, and he paid the ultimate sacrifice to free us. So really, we have two major times during the year that we get to think deeply about the Lord's sacrifice on our behalf. So thank you for that question. That was fantastic. Let's get to the next question. This is coming from John Mike. When we enter into heaven, what age will we be? I always wondered this. Will we all be the same age? That's a good question, Mike, or John Mike. I think the answer comes in Luke chapter 21, when Jesus was being asked about what is going to come in the age to come. And let me back up to chapter 20, actually. It's in Luke chapter 20. This is where some of the Sadducees, who did not believe in the resurrection, they came and they were trying to stump Jesus with this question. So let me just pull up this passage so that you guys can see this as well, and that way you can kind of look over my shoulder and see this scripture as well. And I think that is going to we'll get this going. All right. So again, looking at the passage there in Luke, I was trying to share my screen and the software went kaput. So anyway, Luke chapter 20, verse 27, then some of the Sadducees who deny that there is a resurrection came to him and asked him, Teacher, Moses wrote us that if a man's brother dies, having a wife, and he dies without children, his brother should take his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. And so, of course, this all happens 7 times over. And he says, in the resurrection, whose wife does she become? For she had 7 had her as wife. So then the point here is that Jesus then answers this because they are mistaken about the age to come. He says, the sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are counted worthy to attain to that age and the resurrection of the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, nor can they die anymore, for they are equal to the angels and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. So it's kind of like saying, well, what age does an angel have? And you're like, well, I don't know. I don't know what age an angel has. I don't really think of angels as having a particular age. Now, I understand the question, because what age are we going to look like? Are we going to look like we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 80s, right? We're probably all hoping for, 20 something, I suppose. And I think that's possible. It is possible, but I think there may be something that would transcend that based on that passage there in Luke chapter 20, that we are going to be equal to the angels. We're going to have a body that is analogous to an angel body. All right. We will not be angels, but we will be like the angels. We'll be equal to the angels. And so we're told that we're going to have a body in that same style. If we think of Gabriel and Michael, when we think of their bodies, we think of these incredibly powerful, beautiful, luminous beings. And so we're going to be very much like that. So I think when, kind of what we're used to here and now is a certain look, but it will be that, but a whole lot more. So it'll be the absolute prime, optimal, perfect human image, and then enhance it by, I don't know, 1,000,000, right? And that will be something like what our bodies are going to be like in that age. Beyond that, I really can't tell you, because we're just not told in any any kind of specific sense of what we're going to be. So I don't know if we're going to come back as 26 or 36 or something like that, but it's going to be a lot better than any of us have ever imagined. So thank you, John. I appreciate that. Great question. All right. Here's another one. What do you think about the Enneagram? That's a great question, Christian, but I don't know what that is actually referring to. So maybe my wife seems to know what that is. Maybe she can translate for me. Okay, a personality test profile. I don't know. I'm pretty good at Bible questions, but I'm not so good on that one. So, all right, this is from Noel. Did the Catholic Church switch the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday? And is the 25th of December really Christmas Day? Wow, that's a loaded question. So there's two questions here. Let's start with the Sabbath to did they change Sabbath to Sunday? Well, yes. In fact, they come out and they admit as much, that they changed Saturday to Sunday. All right, that is on record. I don't think I have my PowerPoint right here in front of me, but I have my notes. Let's see, maybe I do have my notes. I'll see if I can pull that up for us. But they admit that they went and changed the day. In fact, it's very interesting. In the Catholic, it's called the Catholic. Let me look it up here. The Catholic Mirror. Okay, the Catholic Mirror, and this is the 1893 edition. And this is actually Rome. Okay, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, gives a challenge to Protestants about the true meaning of Sabbatismos in Hebrews 4:9. Now, this is the greatest of ironies, okay, because the Catholic Church is coming right out and saying, look, you Protestants have it all wrong. It's not Sunday. And what they're saying is, we did that. That was our idea to change Saturday to Sunday. The Catholic Church did that because we believe that we have the authority to do that. It says nowhere in Scripture that Saturday was changed to Sunday. That's the Catholics saying that, right? And again, they're happy to say that because they believe that through the papacy, they have a divine right to make such a declaration. And so the challenge is that you Protestants should go back to the Sabbath, which is the biblical day. But if you're not going to, then you should basically admit that you're following us. That's essentially their argument. And the argument in this article concerning how it's absurd to suggest that the Bible has changed Saturday to Sunday, they say it's absurd. They say it's completely contrary to the Word of God. And the whole idea that the passage in Hebrews 4:9 is just completely wrong. So I'll just read a little bit from this Catholic Mirror magazine. There remains, therefore, a rest to the people of God. That's the King James Version. And so what they're pointing out is that this phrase is used in defense of a Sunday rest, And they say, a quote, because of this erroneous translation and Protestant hostility against the seventh-day weekly Sabbath. Now, again, these are Catholics speaking, and they're challenging Protestants. Okay, so I quote again: the fourth commandment, in preference to Sunday, this verse is almost universally misinterpreted and misunderstood. In fact, the true meaning of Hebrews 4:9 is the very opposite of the false interpretation assumed today. Mainstream Christianity teaches that Christians are no longer required to observe the seventh-day Sabbath because they deliberately misconstrue this verse to mean Christ has given them rest, quote unquote, as some say, a release from the commandment keeping. This false claim is the premise that Jesus has fulfilled the law for them. As a result, people are told the Christian has entered into a spiritual rest from sin and that Jesus himself is their spiritual Sabbath. End quote. All right. So again, that's the Catholic Mirror in 1893 saying you Protestants are completely wrong. You're twisting scripture here. And I agree with the Catholics in this case. I mean, they have really gotten this one. So again, that's the great irony, is that they freely admit that they changed. They don't claim that the Bible changed it. They say we did it because we have the authority to do that. And okay, I mean, I don't agree with their conclusion, but I do appreciate their candor in saying that they have the authority to do that. All right. So again, I don't think that they actually have the authority, but I appreciate that they admit that they think that they have the authority, and that's why they did it. And so that's pretty fair. Okay. So the seventh day was changed, and the earliest that I've been able to trace that is when we go back to a second century heretic named Marcion, who was rabidly anti-Jewish. He was anti-Semitic. He coined the terms like Old Testament versus New Testament. He had this idea that there was a Old Testament God who was this demiurge. He was this people's God, if you will. And he foisted the legal system, the law, the Torah, on the backs of the Jews. And then finally, the real creator God sent Jesus to die to free not only the Jews, but mankind from this terrible legal system. So this was Marcion, a rabid heretic in the second century. And people, the likes of Irenaeus, Justin Martyr, and others were trying to stamp him out, Tertullian as well. They were trying to stamp out this heresy. But here's the sad truth. They did not stamp him out. In fact, they note that his heresies had spread throughout the entire world. And by the time we get to the 5th century, Marcionism is actually confused with Christianity because in many respects they had merged. All right, so many of the teachings that were shocking in that 2nd century context had become commonplace by the 5th century. So commonplace that they were not even called Marcionism anymore. They were just referred to as Christianity. And so these ideas then just became part of the bread and butter, if you will, of the church's teaching. And so, yeah, of course, they separated the Old Testament books from the New Testament books. You had the Jews on this side, and you had Christ on this side, or the church on this side, and you had the law over here, and then you had grace over here. And so these ideas, this massive dichotomy of these two, kind of schools of thought, just kept getting wider and wider. And that became just the common rhetoric concerning the law, concerning the Old Testament, and all these terms that we don't even bat an eye about today, because it's like a fish discovering there's water. Like, what? Where's the water? Like you're living in it, right? And so what's tricky is that the average Christian has no idea that these things even exist. Now, I want to be fair, because I really do believe that, let's call them your passionate, zealous Christians, are really seeking the Lord. They love Jesus, Yeshua, with all of their heart. And so I do not want to throw them under the bus, okay? But I think when we're talking about these kinds of details, we have to understand that very early on, some poison was thrown into the well, and everybody's been drinking it ever since then. So then the question is, how do we get the poison out of the well? It's not that easy to get the poison out of the water system. It's just in there, right? And so we have to live with this and recognize some of these things. And so, the Lord is opening the eyes of some of us slowly to these things, and in our own little ways, we're trying to make a difference. Ultimately, it's going to take the Lord who will open the eyes of everybody to the Sabbath and realize that it was not something that he did away with. It was not some evil thing that Jesus had to die to free us from. The Sabbath is actually freeing. The Sabbath is a gift. It's a time of rest. It's a time to stop and slow down. It's a time to fellowship and to put down your work, put down those things that you do to make a living, and to say, Lord, I'm going to trust you today. I'm going to trust that you're going to provide for me. And I'm going to go spend time studying the word. I'm going to spend time fellowshipping. I'm going to spend time maybe sleeping. I'm going to spend time with my family, or just enjoying myself and relaxing, because you made this day for me and not me for the day. So that's the first thing. All right. That's the first part of your question, which is a great question. Now let's look at December 25th. All right. Is that really Christmas Day? Well, it more than likely is not the actual birthday of Jesus. That's probably not the case. But let's look at statistically. We have 1 in 365 days to get it right. So which day is it? Well, that's the big question, because we're not told in Scripture what day Jesus was born. We're not really even told the season. Now, I've heard people say, well, the shepherds were out in the fields, and they probably wouldn't be doing that in December because it's cold. But that's really Western kind of thinking. In fact, when we go back and we look at the life of Jacob, one of the reasons that he fled from his father-in-law is because he figured his father-in-law would rip him off. And so when his father-in-law tracks him down and says, why did you take off? He says, I've been working for you for 20 years and you changed my wages all these times. And I was out in the heat of the day and the freezing cold at night, right? So Jacob was tending the sheep, and he was doing it when it was cold, right? It gets cold at night. And in Israel, even though on average it doesn't snow, it can still get quite cold at night, of course, especially in the winter. And just because it's cold doesn't mean that the sheep aren't going to be out in the fields, right? I mean, sheep do have really thick wool coats, so they're fine. And it's the shepherd that has to endure. And we saw that Jacob was actually a shepherd, and he had to endure those cold nights. So to suggest that it's not in December because it was too cold, I think is a very empty kind of argument. But here's the reality. We're not told when he was born. Now, there's a theory that he might have been born during the time of Sukkot. I think that's a persuasive argument, but I can't find really hardcore evidence to make that case. I just don't see it in Scripture. I've heard others suggest that he was probably born around the time of Passover. And I'm like, okay, maybe he was born around Passover. But again, where does it say it in Scripture? Now, what people will try to do is to look at the birth of John the Baptist, and if we can kind of figure that out, then Jesus was born 6 months later. And so based on that, people have come to the conclusion that Jesus was probably born around Sukkot. Now, again, if he were born around the time of Sukkot, I think that would make a lot of sense. And I would not be surprised if that were the case. All right, so I'm totally fine if Jesus were born during the time of Sukkot. But again, it's trying to piece together the evidence and to make a case for it. And I think we can make a case for it, but we can't know with absolute certainty. All right, that's just the challenge. So here's what I would really encourage people to do, because I know it's that season again, right? And I'm going to start seeing it on Facebook. We're going to start seeing the memes of how absolutely evil Christmas is, and it's the worst pagan thing ever. And I get it. I personally don't believe that Jesus was born December 25th. And I think that there are people that will celebrate this thing called Christmas, and they could care less that it's about Jesus. They could care less that it has anything to do with the Bible or anything remotely religious or biblical or anything with that. Okay. So there's definitely that extreme of the community. But let's be fair. There are people who religiously keep Passover, they keep Yom Kippur, but do they have a relationship with God, or are they just going through the motions, right? I think you can have the people that are just going through the motions with every kind of religious holiday that you could possibly have. So I'm not saying that we need to recognize December 25th as the official birthday of Jesus, because I don't believe that it is. But I also think we should be slow to throw stones at the people that are truly wanting to worship the birth of Jesus. I'm not talking about Rudolph, and I'm not talking about commercialism and all that stuff that happens at the mall or on Amazon or whatever you're doing. Or if you're taking your child to see Santa Claus, I'm not talking about that stuff. Right? I'm not talking about all those other trappings that happen around that time. I'm only discussing right now the people that are genuinely excited about the birthday of Jesus. And some people choose to do that on December 24th, 25th. Okay. And so here, this is a question. This is a question I ask myself sometimes. I say, okay, so we don't want to sing Christmas songs because that would give the wrong impression that we're celebrating this Saturnalia holiday. But if I'm singing Joy to the World, O come, O come you Mary, come, God rest you merry gentlemen. There we go. I'm trying to think of these songs. If we sing these songs that are celebrating the birth of Jesus, is it okay if we sing them in October? If that was when Jesus was born, would that be okay? Is it okay if we sing it in November? Is it okay if we sing them maybe at the early part of December? Right? I mean, what if we sing them on December 23rd? Maybe you see where I'm going with this, is that there's nothing wrong with the songs. It's just maybe we have trouble with December 25th because we think that's probably not the birthday of Jesus. Okay, fair enough. Let me just say one more thing about this, is that, again, probably December 25th was the Feast of Saturnalia, and there were some bad things happening on the Feast of Saturnalia, to be clear. But, here in the West, in English-speaking countries, the days of our weeks are actually named after gods, and we use them freely. We talk about Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, right? Wednesday is Woden's Day, and we don't really think anything of it. We don't think that we're worshiping a false god, because I hope we don't, and we just use these. So, we have kind of an issue that partly comes down to our frame of reference because we speak English. Let me just give another example. When we get to the other major holiday that some Messianics and Torah folks have trouble with, which is Easter, of course, they make a huge issue like, no, don't say Happy Easter to me. But again, if we think about the Christians who are celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, I'm not talking about people that are into the Easter bunny and they're, into whatever weird stuff. And I'm not defending dyeing eggs or any of that stuff. I'm only talking about the people who are remembering, celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, and they're praising God for that. And they say Happy Easter. Are they really invoking an ancient goddess? I don't think they are. I did a teaching on this not long ago, discussing the origins of the word Easter. And I traced it back to John Wycliffe. No, not John Wycliffe. Hold on. The other guy, not Wycliffe. But Tyndale, William Tyndale. There we go. All right, now William Tyndale did a great service for those of us who speak English. Right, he translated the Bible from the original Hebrew and Greek into English. Now, he did base some of his translation off the translation of John Wycliffe, who translated it from Latin into English, but Tyndale went back and he did it from the originals. And it's interesting that he coined the term Passover when we're looking at the book of Exodus. He actually coined the term Passover because the term before that had been called Pascha in the Greek, and he came up with a term in English. So he creates this term when he's translating in the book of Exodus. But then when he comes to the New Testament and he comes to the Gospels, and when Jesus says to his disciples, I have greatly desired to eat this, to eat this Passover with you. How does William Tyndale translate it? He says, I have greatly desired to eat this Easter with you. Now, clearly, the context tells you that Easter, when William Tyndale's translation says Easter, he's talking about Passover, because what we think of as Easter Sunday would not even come for another couple days, right? So he was not suggesting that Easter was in fact a pagan goddess, all right? At least not in that particular context. So this begs the question in my mind, why didn't William Tyndale just use the same word that he used and he created in the book of Exodus? Why did he use that in the Gospels? And I don't know the answer to that. My suggestion is that I think he just messed up. I think he got it wrong. And why am I being so gracious to this guy? You know why? Because he was burned at the stake. He would not give in. The King of England was rather upset at him for translating the Bible. He didn't put the word. He was supposed to use the word church. He didn't want to use that. But ultimately, he paid the ultimate sacrifice to give us a faithful translation. The Pope wasn't too happy with him either. So he really paid a price for translating the Bible. And I don't think that he was trying to subvert the truth. I think he just probably got that term wrong. Because I will say this, the word Easter, it almost certainly does come from the Estre, which probably comes from Ishtar, and it's the goddess of the dawn. But I don't think that William Tyndale was suggesting that we're supposed to worship the goddess of the dawn. If he had, why would he be willing to die for this translation? It just doesn't make sense, right? So when we go back and we take a deeper look at some of these historical nuggets, we find that it gets a little bit murky, it's not always so clear, it's like, okay, the waters are kind of muddy here, and I can't make good sense of what really happened. And so I need to show some grace to William Tyndale, because I'm indebted to him. If it had not been for him, I would have had probably a different understanding of the Bible. So we're very, very grateful for what he's done. And again, he paid the ultimate sacrifice in that case. So December 25th, is it really Christmas Day? Probably not. Do we know when Christmas Day is? No, we don't. We have some theories. Maybe they're right? Maybe they're not, but we don't know ultimately when it is. So here's what I would encourage all of us to do. You don't have to celebrate December 25th. Okay, that's fine. You can notice that there are some pagan customs and practices that have been melded together with this thing that happens on December 25th. That's pretty clear, I think. But let's be nice and not throw stones at the sincere, passionate, zealous believers who are, saying, Merry Christmas, right? Because in their mind, they're saying, Jesus was born, right? And Jesus came into the world, and it's a great thing that Jesus came into the world. And I personally am still in favor of the birth of Jesus, because if Jesus had not been born into the world, then he never would have been able to teach. He would certainly not have gone to the cross, nor could he have risen again. All right, so let's just show some grace to those around us. You don't have to agree with them, but we can still be nice. We don't have to throw stones at the topic of December 25th. So thank you for those wonderful loaded questions, Noel. Those will probably get me in trouble with somebody, so I appreciate that. All right, let's go to John Mike. He has another question. What does Satan look like? When he was tempting Jesus, was he in human body like us? And is he in that same body today here on earth? Well, wow. We don't know what Satan looks like completely. We can maybe catch a glimpse of what he could possibly look like. But even so, it's kind of tricky to really put that together. We know from Ezekiel 28 that he's called the anointed cherub. This is in Ezekiel 28, verse 14. You were the anointed cherub who covers, I established you. All right, so this cherub, cherubim, if you will, in the English, the kruvim, we find them in some pretty amazing detail when we go to Ezekiel chapter 1. So there Ezekiel is having this pretty amazing vision, and he has these four living creatures, or these living creatures of the likeness of four living creatures, and they had their appearance was the likeness of a man. All right, so they had the likeness of the man, and then each one had four faces. So the basic body type is like a man, and then they had four faces, and they also had four wings. Their legs apparently are straight. The soles of their feet were like the soles of calves' feet. Okay, so kind of, sort of a humanish form, but not really completely human. They seem to have cow's feet of some sort. The hands were of a man, and then they had wings on four sides. And then they got these faces. They had the face of a man, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, and the face of an eagle. So these are pretty weird-looking creatures, to be clear. So these are also cherubim. These are cherubim. Now, this begs the question, do they have four faces at the same time? Like, do they have kind of a square head? And, on this side is the face of a man, and on this side is the face of an ox, and on this side is the face of an eagle. And this side is the face of a lion. Is that what we're to understand? Or just, maybe the idea of four faces is that they have a face that can change. Is that what it's saying? I mean, it's not clear. It says on this side and on that side. So it sounds like they have four faces all at the same time. Maybe we're missing something in the text. Maybe there's a clue that we're not seeing. But you get this impression that they have four simultaneous faces. For example, when you think about your own face, we have the word face in English. It's singular, but in Hebrew, it's the word panim, and it's plural, faces. Why would you call this thing your faces? I mean, I only have one face, right? Well, do I or don't I? Because if you think about it, if you look at your own face, go look in the mirror and just start making funny faces, right? Your face is always changing so that it's always faces. It's never just one static face. You only have one static face in a picture, right? But you probably, even if you took another picture, you probably couldn't perfectly recreate that face. At least not most of us, unless you're an actor. And so we're just getting a sense here of the basic body type that Satan has. So he probably has a humanish body type. Does he have many faces? Does he have different faces at the same time, or are they faces that he can portray? We don't know. We're just not really told. But it's interesting when we go back to Ezekiel 28, we are given a little bit of sense of what sort of happened to Satan. So God says that you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. You were in Eden. You had all these stones as your covering. You were the anointed cherub. You walked back and forth on the holy mountain. And God says your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. Now, when we think about the beauty, that God gave him perfect beauty, Perfect, nothing lacking, right? You cannot get better than Satan's beauty. That's what the word perfect means, right? If it's perfect, you cannot improve upon it. You are perfect in your ways. You are perfect, right? And God established him as the seal of perfection. Wow, what a statement God is saying, that when you looked at Satan, you could not do any better. You could not be more beautiful. You could not be more wise than Satan was. He was the absolute crowning achievement of God. Now, I personally believe that the angels are created in God's image as well, just like we are. We're made lesser than the angels, but we all have a similar body type. What type of body does God have? Maybe that's where we should start when we start to consider what Satan could possibly look like. Well, in Ezekiel chapter 1, Ezekiel says concerning the one on the throne, and it said, and on the likeness of the throne was a likeness with the appearance of a man high above it. And he says, this was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. So who did he see on that throne? God. What did God look like? Man, or man looked like God. This is not surprising because God created man in his image and in his likeness. Okay. So he created us in his image and in his likeness. And the angels are presumably of a similar nature. There are places where it says that they are spirits of fire. So they're not made of dirt. They're made of a different substance called spirit. God is spirit. God is not made of spirit, but God is spirit, right? So God is a source of this. So angels, man, and God all share a similar body type, right? It's God's body type, right? It's not that God looks like us, but we look like God, right? And certainly God can far surpass anything that we can possibly understand. Notice he seems to be limited as to how he can present himself. Let's go to another very interesting passage, which is in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Here Paul says, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food. Let's stop there for just a second. What were they eating back in the wilderness? Well, they were eating manna, of course. He calls it spiritual food. Was it food that they could not really truly consume? Well, they did consume it, right? They went out every day and they collected it. They would get twice as much on Friday, not supposed to collect on Shabbat. And they would eat this, right? They would literally eat it, and had the taste of kind of a honey, coriander and honey, right? So it had a real taste. It had real texture. The guy you were looking at, like, minhu, mana, what is this? And they really couldn't put their fingers on it, but they could eat it. So it was real food, but it was called spiritual food. So in what way was it spiritual? It was spiritual because it did not originate from planet Earth. It came from a different place, came from the spiritual dimension. That's why it was spiritual food. All right. And they all drank the same spiritual drink. Well, you recall that the rock was split open and water came out of it. So Paul is calling this spiritual drink. Did they really actually consume the water? Yes, they did. Did it quench their thirst? Yes, it did. What was the difference? Why was it called spiritual? Because it did not originate from planet Earth. It came from a different source. Now, notice this, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. So Paul is saying the rock followed them in the wilderness, and the rock was Christ. Wow, that's a surprise, right? Now, what's so amazing about this is that Paul is not coming up with a new idea here. If you go back and you look in the Targumim, you will find that in the Targumim, which are the Aramaic translations of the Hebrew Bible, they had in there that the rock from which the water came, actually followed them in the wilderness. So Paul is taking this idea and he's saying, yep, he's endorsing that idea, but he's saying, but the rock wasn't just any old rock. The rock was Christ. All right. So we see here that God can change himself, right? He can metamorphose when he needs to. Now, his normal state is not a rock, which is probably a good thing. It's a little bit hard to associate with the rock, but he did become a rock. And this is probably why when God said, I will go and stand in front of the rock, this is in Exodus chapter 17, I will go and stand in front of the rock and you will strike it and water will come out of it. So God like puts himself in front of the rock, and it's possible that when he says, I will go stand in front of it, that he's actually kind of, I don't know, attaching himself to the rock. I don't know how that all works. I wasn't there to see it. I can't look into the spiritual realm, but I can just read the text. And so in some way he did something with the rock there. And so that when Moses struck the rock, he wasn't just striking the rock. He was striking Yeshua, which becomes significant later when God says, now go speak to the rock. Go speak to the rock. And what does Moses do? He gets mad at the people. You rebels, do I have to bring water out of this rock for you? And he went and struck the rock twice. And because of that, God said, sorry, Moses, you can't go in. You're like, really? It's such a big deal? Yeah, it was a big deal because he was supposed to follow the orders there and do as he was instructed to complete this picture. So again, we get this picture of certainly God being able to change into different shapes. We know that Satan can also transform himself into an angel of light. We're told this in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 14. No wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. So he's clearly not an angel of light now because he has to transform himself into an angel of light. That kind of hints at the idea that he used to be an angel of light, what we saw in Ezekiel 28, Ezekiel chapter 1. So he had that appearance before. So now he's not that. That suggests that he lost something. Let me go back to Ezekiel chapter 28 really quick, because there's an important clue in there that I want to point out. God says in verse 18, he says, you defiled your sanctuaries by the multitude of your iniquities. Therefore I brought fire from your midst. It devoured you. I turned you to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all who saw you. So I brought fire from your midst. In the Hebrew, it says, I brought fire out from within you. So the fire that was in him, that was part of him, God took that from him. Well, this makes sense when we look at Ezekiel chapter 1, and it talks about these cherubim are fiery. They have this fiery appearance. So that fiery appearance, God took that away. They no longer have that, or Satan at least does not have that fiery appearance. So if he took away the fiery appearance, we were kind of left with this kind of a shell, sort of like a dark, ghoulish kind of being. He can transform himself into an angel of light, but he is not, his resting state, if you will, is not an angel of light. So I can tell you a little bit of what he doesn't look like. I can speculate a bit about what he does look like. He's possibly kind of a dark Jabba the Hutt. He's kind of this blob that's not so beautiful. Probably he seems to have this sense of being dark, maybe. He definitely doesn't have fire coming out of him anymore. He's not an angel of light, so he's presumably an angel of darkness. If he's not an angel of light, then that leaves the angel of darkness option. So again, he's human. He's humanish in his shape. He may have several faces. We are told, of course, that he has the form of a dragon. Right? Is that being very literal, or is that just kind of a figurative suggestion? Again, we're not told specifically what he actually looks like. We're just given glimpses of what he probably is. We're given a few clues as to what he isn't, but we're not told his exact shape. So I kind of go with the Jabba the Hutt idea that he's just kind of a worm. He's a blob, and he can be beautiful when he needs to, when he wants to, but his resting state is not that glorious. So is he on the earth today? I don't believe so. I think that's why when the war breaks out in heaven between Michael and his angels and Satan and his angels, it says, and no place was found for them any longer, and so Satan was cast to the earth. I still see that as a future event. I don't think that Satan has free reign. Now, I do think he has incredible influence, absolutely. And I think that he can make his influence felt, but I don't think that he can bodily come here. One reason I think that's because of Revelation chapter 12. But I also think, considering, or, when we think about the seances that happen, when people try to connect with the beings on the other side, they have to go through a lot of ritual. So they have a pentagram, they have candles and all the different elements, the 5 elements that they're supposed to have. Blood is quite often, almost always associated with that. And then after they've gone through these various rituals, including blood, often, it's a sacrifice of some sort. Sometimes it's a human sacrifice, unfortunately. Then and only then, apparently, can these beings manifest, but they can only do it for a limited amount of time. They cannot stay indefinitely. And so I don't believe that Satan can just bodily manifest himself like angels can, but he can only do it under certain conditions and certain ways. But the one thing that he and the bad angels can do is to possess people. They can, their spiritual state can enter into the spiritual space of a person, and they can possess that person. So that's the thing that I see that they can do. All right. Thank you, John, for another good question. All right. This is from Jacqueline. Question, thoughts on 10 days of affliction, awe between Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, which ends tonight or tomorrow, depending on which calendar you choose. That's true. There's always difference in calendars. So what are my thoughts on those? Well, this is the time that we're supposed to be thinking about certainly what Jesus did, but not only what he did, but what have we done? In other words, how have we acted over the last year? Is there anybody that we need to go and make things right with? It's a wonderful time if you'll take the time to do your best to mend any broken relationships. Now, let's be clear. Some relationships are out of our hands. There are some things that, people won't talk to us for various reasons. Maybe we did offend somebody years ago, and, that person just refuses to talk to us. But sometimes if we reach out and we try to connect with people, we discover that we actually can. And, I've been doing a little bit of this as well. I've just been reaching out to a few people that, there have been a few broken relationships. Maybe it was me, maybe it was them. I don't know. That's another discussion for another time. But reaching out and just trying to maybe just say hello, right? Just maybe send them a text. Say, how are you doing, man? I've just been thinking about you. And sometimes it that's enough. Sometimes it can go further. Sometimes it doesn't need to. Depending, of course, on what's happened in your life. And so, in as much as it depends on you, you need to live righteously, and you need to make things right with your fellow man. If you have been the one who has offended somebody, who has wronged somebody, then it's upon you to go and to make that right. Now, again, I understand that sometimes people say, I'm never going to talk to you again. Don't ever contact me. If that's the case, you might be able to say something through a proxy, through a friend or a friend of a friend. Say, just tell that person, I am so sorry, right? That may be one way. Maybe you only pray. Say, Lord, I regret what I did, and I wish I could let so-and-so know how broken I am over my actions. So that may be another way. And sometimes you can actually call the person or look them up or find a way to make it right. So again, whatever you're able to do, you can't do more than you can do, right? So only do as much as you can, of course, and just take the time to be thinking about how you can make those relationships better? So I think that was a really good question. So, all right, let's get to our next question here. Here's a question from Daryl. Many in the Hebrew roots movement believe wearing tzitzit is a commandment we should be keeping. What do you believe the Bible teaches? That's a great question, Daryl. Let me go to, I believe it is Deuteronomy 14. And let's see if I got my passage correct here. All right, so Deuteronomy and in Numbers chapter 15. Let me actually start in Numbers 15. So Numbers 15, there was somebody who was out gathering sticks on the Sabbath, and God had just told them what to do, right? And that there was going to be one law for both the stranger and the native born. And if the person doesn't do this, he's going to be cut off from his people. All right. Now it says, verse 32, while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him under guard because it had not been explained what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, the man must surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. So as the Lord commanded Moses, all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died. Ugh, that's not so nice. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue thread in the tassels of the corners. All right, so that's the basis. And then the other passage actually is Deuteronomy 22. There we go. Deuteronomy 22:12. It says, here Moses says, you shall make tassels on the four corners of the clothing with which you cover yourself. All right. And then we have in the New Testament, we have Jesus saying to not make long your tassels or your phylacteries, right? I don't know how tassels came out as phylacteries, but Jesus makes a point here in Matthew 23, verse 5. He says, concerning the Pharisees, the scribes and the Pharisees, they sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works. For they say, and do not do, for they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries, that's tassels, broad and enlarge the borders of their garments. All right, so Jesus really hits home on this very idea, because here you have these scribes and Pharisees who are making broad or long the phylacteries, their tassels, for what purpose? To be seen by men. To be seen by men. That's interesting. So in the Hebrew Bible, he says, so that you don't forget the Torah, put these things on the four corners of your garments. And then by the time we get to Jesus, we have a gross misrepresentation of what God desired. And they're doing it so that they would be seen by men. It's no longer something for them to remember so that they would not break God's laws, but they would have them out so that men could see them and see how holy they were. So this is the big discussion, right? So are we to wear tassels or are we not? Let's go back really quick to Deuteronomy 22, verse 12. He says, you shall make tassels on the four corners of the clothing with which you cover, or you cover yourself, depending on how you translate that. So this raises an interesting discussion. The four corners of your clothing. So this is why you will often see Hebrew roots Torah folks wearing four tassels. Of course, the Jews wear four tassels as well. But there's a real big difference between a Jewish person who's wearing tassels and a Hebrew roots person. A Hebrew roots person generally will put them on his belt buckle, and he'll put, two on the right side and two on the left. Then you got your four. All right. And I've seen them where they're pretty long. They're practically down to the knees. And it's like, okay, you know, you can do that if you want to. That's fine. But the question is, what does Scripture command us? Because we're not living in the land. We certainly have different clothing. Is that what the Lord is telling us to do? What was he telling them to do? So I do find the Chabad interpretation significant, because they've been wearing tassels for a very long time, and they believe that the tassels are to be connected to the talit. Now the talit, let's see if I think I have a talit here somewhere. Hold on one second. Here we go. That's the talit bag. I'm getting it. One second. All right, here we go. All right, I got my talit. Okay, this is good. We have the talit. Okay, so I have it folded up, of course. Now, these are obviously the tassels in question. Now, this is a garment. I can use this to cover myself. In fact, I do every Shabbat when I teach. Well, almost everyone. Sometimes I forget. But I put this on, and there are tassels on every corner. They got the blue thread. All right. And so this is how I interpret this commandment, that the talit, which is what I use to cover myself, it has the tassels on the four corners, because this is actually a four-cornered garment. And that's part of the discussion. Is it just that you're supposed to wear four on any piece of clothing, or is it a garment with four corners, and then on each of those corners should you put a tassel? That's really the big debate. Okay, and I lean toward the interpretation that this is my four-cornered garment with which I cover myself, and I've put those. I mean, I didn't, but it came pre-installed. But the tassels came on there, and when I see those, I'm reminded of the commandments. I am reminded. Now there's 613 knots altogether. If you add up all these things, there's 613. Now I don't believe that there are actually 613 commandments. I think that is a number that the rabbis came up with. I think there's a lot of duplication of those commandments. I did a teaching about the 613 laws of love, and in that video, you can look it up on my YouTube channel. In that video, I suggest, and I go through each of the laws. I go through all of them, all 613, as put out by aish.com. And I show with color coding and such that many of them are duplicates. They've taken the law here, and it says it in this way, and then it says it another slightly different way, but it's the same exact law. And so, I would suggest that we have fewer than 200 laws that we actually can live out today, and all of those are just an extension of the 10 commandments, which are an extension of the 2, to love God and love your neighbor. So the point of the tassels is that I should not forget to keep God's laws. Who are these for? Are they so that I can show everybody around me how amazing I am and that I'm keeping it and say, hey, look, I'm different because I wear these? Not in my opinion. Now look, if people want to wear them, I will never say anything against that. If you want to wear tassels and you want to put them on your belt buckles, go for it. I think that's perfectly fine, right? It's a free country. You're welcome to do that. I do not believe that that is what the commandment is telling me to do. If it did, I would certainly put them on. But if I were to put them on and wear them, I would keep them quite short, because it's not to be a visible sign for those around me. It's to be for me. Why? So that I don't forget to keep the commandments. That's the difference, right? They are there for me to remember to keep the commandments, not for others to see that I'm supposedly keeping the commandments. All right, so that's probably the discussion. It's again, I'm all for people wearing them. I think it's perfectly fine. I think it's a interpretation as to how we're going to look at those passages, and I know there's lots of debate about this, but I do not believe that we are commanded to, snap them to our belt buckles or something like that. If people want to do it, I totally support it. I really do. But my interpretation of how to fulfill that is to have a talit. And I can look at these, right? And I even have a few of them up around my house so that I can see them. I can see those, and they remind me of the commandments. Like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to keep God's commandments. That's what I'm here to do. That's what I want to do. That's how I find peace and joy in life, is when I keep his commandments, when I live according to his laws. Thank you, Daryl, for that great question. Let's move on to the next one. All right, this is from, let's see here. All right, there's some conversations. That's great. All right, here's a question from John Padilla. In your book, The Rapture Reclaimed, Steinle says the Greek word for rapture is harpasigomisa, but in blue letter it shows harpazo. Explain. And what happens at this taking up New Jerusalem ? Good one. So basically, what Steinle has done, he's made a very nuanced. I want to understand this is a very nuanced kind of discussion, but unfortunately, that word has been, shall we say, sort of glossed over when we come to that. So this is in 1 Thessalonians chapter 17. All right, here's the New King James translation. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So when I go back to the actual Greek, I see something a bit different. All right, so I'm going to try to share my screen again. Now, the last time I did that, it kind of made it freeze. Well, let's see if I can do that without killing everything here. All right, I think I'm successfully sharing the screen, but it looks like you guys are seeing nothing. So that's always a bummer. Well, tell you what, guys, I'm not going to share my screen. You'll have to take my word for it, but I will read it as faithfully as I can. So the Greek word here is harpagesometha. All right, so the metha at the end is the reflexive. Okay, so this is something that reflexive or passive voice. Okay, something that happens to me. I'm not doing it, but it's happening to me. All right, I was given $100. Right, so was given means that it happened to me. For example, the sometha means that we will, something will happen to us in the passive tense. And then harpage, right? So it's not harpazo. That's with a zeta or a trying to think of the letter. I'm blanking right now. But this is with a gamma. So where did this come from? So what Chris Steinle shows in our book is that there's just a minor nuance. And again, it's a very nuanced discussion. But what he's saying is that it's more like it's the idea of see if I can remember the word that he uses. I want to get the right word because he made such a great argument. But to plunder, okay? So we will be plundered versus snatched. All right, what's the difference? All right, and here's what he's saying: it's not that we're going to go to heaven, but we're being made ready for heaven. So the focus is not believers taken to heaven, but believers made ready for the heavenly kingdom. The difference, again, it doesn't radically change the end result, but it does change the focus. It changes the focus. The focus is that we will be transformed. So it's not so much us being taken up into the sky, but us being transformed. So we look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and we compare there where it says that we shall not all sleep, but we shall be changed in the twinkling of an eye, right? This mortality shall put on immortality. Paul is saying the same basic thing. He's using a little bit different word to use it, to be clear, but he's saying that we're transformed. That's the point. that we think he's trying to make. And again, Chris can definitely makes the argument better than I do, but I think he made some very good points. Now, per your question, you're asking, why does the Blue Letter Bible not give that? Because the Blue Letter Bible, now again, I'm not an expert on Blue Letter Bible, and I know some of the guys at Blue Letter Bible. They're great guys, and I really appreciate the work that they've done. But I'm going to make an assumption here that they are using, or they're tying everything to Strong's numbers. All right, so Strong's numbers have these all lumped together instead of having them as two different lexical forms, and they are two different lexical forms. They really are two different lexical forms. They're just lumping these together because they're very related. There's no question that they're clearly related. Right? Even the standard interpretation of this is to snatch away. Okay, to snatch, to steal something. And so again, what Chris does in our book is he goes through and he shows how it means to plunder. Right? So to take something away. So what's being taken away? Our old decaying body is being taken away. Right? It's being snatched, if you will. It's being plundered. It's being ravished, raptured. Right? The word rapture. We think, oh, it's gonna be wonderful. The rapture. It's really this word of to kind of destroy. What's the other term? Well, it's not a good term. Let's put it that way. Okay, it's a very aggressive type term, and so our bodies are going to be completely decimated, destroyed, transformed is the key to this discussion. So I can't tell you all the reasons why Blue Letter Bible did what they did, because I don't work there and I don't know all of their thoughts and intents and their research. But I can tell you that this is the actual Greek word harpasegometha, and I will actually put this in the comment section there so that you can see it for yourself and not just take my word for it, but that is what the Greek word actually is. That's a really wonderful question. So thank you for asking that. All right, let's get to the next one. Let's see here. Some nice discussions going on. It's always good. All right, here's a question from Ronnie Ron. If nobody can see God the Father, how come Isaiah the prophet could? Ooh, that's an excellent question. Excellent question. That does beg the question, if nobody can see him, how did Isaiah the prophet see him? Not only Isaiah, but we have Daniel, right? Daniel sees the Ancient of Days, right? And then he sees the Son of Man coming toward the Ancient of Days. So if the Son of Man is in fact Yeshua, then the Ancient of Days must be God the Father, right? I mean, that's got to be how it works. So Isaiah, Daniel, Ezekiel clearly saw the Father. Not only that, but let's go back to planet Earth and we will go to Exodus chapter 24. And in Exodus 24, it says concerning some of the men there, it says, if I can find it, hold on. Let's get to the right book, Exodus 24. All right. So in Exodus 24, verse 9, then Moses went up, also Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu, and 70 the elders of Israel, and they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and it was like the very heavens in its clarity. But on the nobles of the children of Israel, he did not lay his hand. So they saw God, and they ate and they drank. Whoa. So they got to see God. All right. Let's go to Exodus chapter 34. This is the beautiful passage where Moses says, if I have found favor in your sight, show me your glory. God says, well, I would, but I can't, because no man can see me. And this is actually in Exodus 33. Please show me your glory. God says, I'll make all my goodness pass before you. and I'll proclaim my name, the name of Yehovah, before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. Here is a place by me, and you shall stand on the rock. So it shall be while my glory passes by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand while I pass by. Then I will take away my hand, and you will see my back, but my face shall not be seen. All right. So Moses gets to see God in the flesh. He gets to see him with his own two eyes, but he cannot see God's face, because no man can see God's face and live. It's not that, hey, if you see my face, I got to kill you, right? It's not like I got some insider information, and if I tell you, then I got to kill you. It's not like that. It's that you're not able to withstand my incredible presence. That's the thing. So let's look at these. This is really a great question. I appreciate the question. So God passes before him, and it says, Yehovah, Yehovah, God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, etc., etc. Good stuff, right? Verse 8, so Moses made haste and bowed his head toward the earth and worshiped. Right? He just like, boom, right? He hits the ground. He's like, oh man, whoa, you're amazing. You are amazing. Let's go to Ezekiel chapter 1, where Ezekiel is not seeing God in the flesh, but he's seeing God in a vision. He's seeing God in a vision, right? It was in visions that I saw these things, not in person. Moses saw him in person. Remember when Moses came down from the mountain as his face was glowing, and he didn't realize it? But he was glowing because he'd been in the very presence of the Lord. He had not seen God's face, but he'd seen the backside of God. All right, and not just an image or some representation, but God himself. But he could not see God's face, because no man can see God's face and live. So Ezekiel is seeing God in a vision. And he says in verse 28, this was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. So when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard a voice of one speaking. Wow. So he doesn't tell us, well, I fell on my face because I felt it was the right thing to do. Or did he fall on his face because he had no other alternative but to fall on his face? I'm guessing it's actually the latter. We have a very similar situation in Daniel chapter 10. But in Daniel chapter 10, it's very interesting, because Daniel is, at least the way I understand it, is not seeing God, but he's seeing just an angel. And so this angel comes. He's all incredibly powerful, right? He's not all powerful. He's not God, but he's very impressive. And it says, and I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. So he's seeing a vision. This is Daniel 10:7. He's seeing a vision of an angel. How do I know it's an angel? Why do I think it's an angel? Because when Daniel is praying, this angel sets out to give Daniel this great vision. But he says that he was withstood by the prince of Persia and the kings of Persia, or the king and the kings of Persia. Yeah, the prince of Persia and the kings of Persia, for 3 weeks, 21 days. If that were Jesus, to me, it just seems like, how could Jesus be withstood by demons or fallen angels? I think he's more powerful. So that doesn't make sense in my mind. So I presume that this is actually an angel that he's seeing. But so he's seeing this angel. He says, I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision. So he's seeing all this in a vision. But a great terror fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves. Therefore I was left alone when I saw this great vision, and no strength remained in me, for my vigor was turned to frailty in me, and I retained no strength. Yet I heard the sound of his words, and while I heard the sound of his words, I was in a deep sleep on my face, with my face to the ground. So modern translation, Daniel passed out, right? He sees this incredible vision of this angel and he just passes out, right? He can't even, he just doesn't have any strength, right? And so then suddenly a hand touched me, which made me tremble on my knees and on my palms of my hands. And he says, get up, Daniel, it's okay. Wow, this is really amazing. And he's just seeing an angel. All right, so let's get to the heart of your question, which is, how is it that if no one can see God, that Isaiah presumably could see God? All right, that's kind of the sense of what we get here. So again, where do we get this idea? So let's we have a couple more clues. First of all, in John 4:24, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. So that's part of our clue, is that we got to seek God in the right context, and then we've got to try to come to grips with this apparent disparity, this apparent contradiction between these two places. So let me go to John 1:18, where it says, "No one has." This is of course this is the Apostle John giving commentary. All right, it's not Jesus speaking directly, but it's commentary by John. He says, "For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, has declared him." All right, so this would seem to be a Bible difficulty, a contradiction, right? Because in Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah says, "Woe am I, for I've seen the King of Kings," right? The Lord of Lords. And then John says that no one has seen God at any time. How does this work out? Well, we have to go back to John chapter 1, verse 1. And there, I think, is the answer. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." All right. So we don't see it so well in the English, but in the Greek, we see something that kind of pops out at us. All right. So this is energe ein hologos, ke hologos ein pros ton theon, ke theon ein hologos. All right. So the pros ton theon, pros is actually means toward, facing. And remember what God said in Exodus chapter 33, that no one can see my face and live. No one can see my face and live. Now, did Moses see God's back? Yes, he did. He most certainly did. But did he see God's face? No, he didn't. And that was Moses in the flesh with his real eyes, not looking in a vision, but seeing God himself right there in front of him. He could not see God's face in that context, at that distance or whatever. If it's a distance thing, I don't know. But he could not see God's face unfiltered. Now, in a vision, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, they saw God and they appeared to see his face in a vision, but they could not see God in the flesh. Think of it like this. Any one of us can watch a nuclear reactor through a TV camera and a TV screen because the radiation doesn't get to us. We're just seeing the picture, right? But we're not experiencing the heat, the radiation, all of the dangerous stuff that's going on inside of that nuclear reactor. We're not experiencing that. We're only experiencing one aspect, and it's a two-dimensional. We're taking this three-dimensional thing and now making it a two-dimensional experience. So when Isaiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, and others saw God, they were able to see a simplified dimensional experience of God, but they did not experience God in his fullness and they were not able to see his face without that layer of the vision. So that, I believe, is the key, is that Jesus, the Word, was face to face. He was with God. The Word was with God, that is proston theon. He was facing God, toward God. So he's the only one that's ever been face to face with the Father. Nobody else has ever done that. Even our text, when we looked in Exodus chapter 24, and it says that they saw the God of Israel, what did they really see of the God of Israel? We were told very clearly that they saw his feet. Right? They did not have a complete representation of God. They simply got to see God's feet. It says, and they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone. So they did see God. They saw his feet. Right? That's pretty cool to see God's feet, but they did not see God's face in all of its clarity. They did not do that. Moses did not get to see God's face. But in a vision, it's different. You can see it because that overwhelming presence and power, the magnitude. It's not radiation, of course. God isn't radioactive, but he's pretty powerful, right? He is so powerful that if we stand in his presence, we cannot endure it. We really can't. We begin to melt under his incredible power. How do I know that? Well, for one, he says, you can't see my face. Two, when he came down on Mount Sinai, what happened to the mountain itself? We read in Exodus chapter 19 about that very experience. So Exodus 19, God says that you tell the people not to come up on the mountain. And so then the next day, it came to pass, the third day in the morning, that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain. And the sound of the trumpet was very loud. And then God calls Moses, and it says, now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke. Why? Because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. The mountain was on fire because God's fire was there. So yeah, you can't see God face to face. The best you can do is see his back, and that's pretty awesome, but you can't see his face. You can't see his face in the flesh. You can see it through a vision, because that's a filter. It's like watching a TV screen. You can watch anything through a TV screen. It doesn't hurt you, right? It might affect your brain, but it doesn't hurt your body if you see something through a TV screen. So that, I believe, is the answer to that wonderful question. So thank you, Ronnie, for asking that. Do appreciate it. Okay, let's see here. Again, guys, if you can ask, put the word question in front of your question, it really helps me to understand when you're asking something versus just having some great conversation. All right, this is from Lena. Some have written about the long day of Joshua, or traveling around the world and gaining a day or losing a day. Please explain. All right, well, of course, I'm not sure who you're hearing about that, but the long day of Joshua is very different than traveling around the world. All right, so when you travel around the world, you can, in fact, gain a day if you go the right direction, or you can, in a sense, lose a day. All right, so if you go from the west to the east, you're going to lose a day because they've already experienced that. Let's just think about it. So let's say that it's Greenwich, England. Right? Let's say that it's 12 o'clock midnight. That means it's going to be so if that's now 12 o'clock, let's say that's Monday. Okay, so Monday, it's still going to be Sunday over here, because we're about 8 hours, at least where I live in Colorado, we're about 8 hours behind. So if it's 12 midnight there and it's now technically Monday, then it's going to be still Sunday, 4 o'clock, right? So there's just a time difference, right? It takes time to get around the planet. Now, if you travel the other direction, if you go from, say, California to Japan, you're going to cross the international date line. And that's when we have all agreed that we will change from one day to the next. And so you will, as far as human calendars go, you will, in a sense, you will gain, you'll gain a day, if I'm saying that. Yes, I think so. I just want to make sure. Because you're crossing over the international date line. Now, it's a completely arbitrary kind of thing, but when you go there, you did, you went maybe from night and then you arrived during the day, or vice versa. So there is clearly a time differential that's happened. That's completely different than Joshua's long day. Very, very different than his long day. So let's go to that. And this is where he tells the sun to stand still, and the sun and the moon to stand still. This is one of these incredible passages. And I get the sense that God's is up there. He's kind of ribbing the angels, like, did you just hear what Joshua said? All right, so this is in Joshua chapter 10. Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ayalon. So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. And there has been no day like that before it or after it, that the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. Very interesting passage. So what does this have to do with anything? Well, this is the day when Joshua was fighting against the Amorites. Now we read in the book of Amos, chapter 2, verse 9, that the Amorites, their height was like the height of the cedars. So these were this was kind of a collective term for some people who were Nephilim. Now, I'm not sure that every Amorite was a Nephilim, but apparently some of them, and a significant number of them, were actually Nephilim. And so Joshua's fighting these things, and he needs more time to get the job done. The sun's going to go down, and then he won't be able to see them and to fight them. So I need more daylight. And so God heeded his voice. Never again did this ever happen. So what happened? Now, again, we're not told all the mechanics of it. We have to try to reverse engineer this a little bit with the data that we have, and to come to some kind of an understanding. So to understand part of this question, we have to go back a little bit to Genesis chapter 7. So in Genesis chapter 7, you recall that God told Noah, get on the boat because we're going to have a flood. And so he did. And it says in verse 11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were open. All right. So remember that the second month, the 17th day, and then we're going to fast forward to the 7th month, right? Then the 7th month, we're going to see that they came out of this. All right, so we have to go to verse 24, and it says, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. 150 days. And then, so that happened for 150 days. Let's see, I'm looking for my other, here we go. This is in chapter 8. Verse 4, then the ark rested in the 7th month on the 17th day. All right, so we go from the 2nd month to the 7th month. How many months is that? That's 5 months. We're told that the waters prevailed 150 days. Well, now the math becomes very simple. We have 5 months, 150 days. That's exactly 30 days per month. That's very interesting. That's very curious. So 30 days per month. Now, we have 12 months in a year. So let's do the math. 30 times 12 is 360. Okay, I mean, we don't have 360-day years, do we? Well, we don't anymore, that's for sure. Our current year is 365 and 1/4 days, so we have to add a leap day every 4 years. But 360, that's an interesting number, isn't it? Because we have circles. How many degrees are in a circle? 360. Is it just a coincidence that there's 360 degrees in a circle, and we apparently have this month, if we have 12 months, then that would equal a year of 360 days. Let's go a little deeper. Let's go to the book of Daniel, because there we're told that the beast, this little horn, is going to prevail for 1,260 days, which is a times time and half a time. And in the book of Revelation, we also see that it will be 42 months. So if you look at those three terms, time, times, and half a time, that's 3.5 years, which is 1,260 days, which is 42 months. So it's really amazing. If you multiply 42 times 30, you get 1,260. If you have 3.5 years, and each of those years consists of 360 days, you get 1,260. Right? So we have this confirmation that what we would call a prophetic year is 360 days. And that takes us back to what we apparently have in the days of Noah, a 360-day year. All right, so all of that was context. This is background to kind of take that next step there. What happened in the long day of Joshua? How could God make the sun stand still, right? I mean, this is one of those big questions, right? How could he possibly have done that? How could the moon apparently not move? Well, it has to do, and this is not my theory. This was a guy, John from Huntington Beach. I forget his last name. He was a NASA astronaut or a NASA engineer. Okay, so he worked on spaceships and all kinds of stuff. And I thought his explanation was quite brilliant. And what he was suggesting is that if we think about the orbit, okay, I'll kind of go like this here, the orbit of the Earth around the sun, if it takes 360 days to go around the sun once, how could God make it look like the sun stopped moving? Well, as the Earth is spinning, you recall, on its axis, and it's spinning, but it's also going around, right? Or however, I can't do this backwards here as I'm looking. But as the Earth is spinning, if God pushes the Earth out further in its orbit to make a longer orbit, that could increase the Earth's orbit by 5.25 days. That's possible. And as that's happening, as the Earth itself is spinning and it's being pushed out, from the perspective being here on Earth, it would look as if the sun stopped moving in the sky. So that would give more time during that day for Joshua to accomplish his fight against the Amorites. It would make the sun look like it stopped moving for about a day. It says that it did not hasten to go down. It took its time going down, as it were. And the moon apparently stopped in the valley of Ayalon. So to me, that's the most scientific explanation possible for what could have happened at Joshua's long day. And that would explain where we go from 360 degrees in a circle, which I do not think is an accident. I think that's based on the former reality that there were 360 days in a year. The ancients understood this. They were able to count, and they realized that there's 360 days in a year. And then in the long day of Joshua, God stretched out the orbit of the Earth around the sun to include an extra 5.25 days. Now, just a little footnote, we have this other thing happening in the days of Hezekiah, where Hezekiah is told that he's going to die, and he's all sad about it. And so then the prophet comes and says, okay, you're not going to die. And to prove it, God's going to give you a sign. What do you want? Do you want the sundial to go backwards or forwards, right? And it was kind of on this whole step thing. It wasn't a Roman sundial, but it was kind of a step thing. And he says, well, it's easy to go forward. How about he goes, send it back. So when he sent it back, that may have in some way giving us that quarter day one way or the other. But so those two events, but primarily the long day of Joshua, and then to a lesser degree, that event in the days of Hezekiah, caused, in my opinion, it caused the calendar to have an extra 5.25 days from what it would have been, what it used to be back in the days of Noah. So that's great. Thank you for that great question, Lena. That was a fun one. Okay, I've got time for maybe one or two more. Let's see what we can do here. Just looking for other questions. Glad there's some good conversation. Here's one. This is Born Again for Christ. He asks, or she, in the Bible, God tells us it tells us to go grow crops and harvest them. Does this exclude marijuana? I ask because I have applied for a job with a cannabis producing company. Would it be a sin? Okay, that's a fun one. Well, it's probably no more a sin than raising barley for hops to make beer, right? It's not the substance that makes it a sin. It's what you do with the substance, right? You can use anything for a bad purpose. Let's take something like sugar. Is it a sin to eat sugar? No, I don't think so. Sugar's kind of nice, actually. But what happens if you eat too much? It will destroy your body. It can give you cancer. It can give you all kinds of stuff, not to mention just getting fat, right? So if we eat too much sugar, it can destroy us. It might happen slowly, but it can destroy us. And then one day we wake up and we're in terrible, terrible health. And we say, oh no, how could this have happened? How did God let me get into this bad shape? And God's like, well, you kept eating massive amounts of sugar every day, way more than you were supposed to. And now you're in trouble, right? So that is a legal substance, a nice substance, in fact, that God has. Let's take another substance. Let's take opium, right? So opium is a very, very ancient plant. And I'm trying to think of the Sumerian name of it. It's escaping me right now, but it meant basically pleasure, joy. Okay, that was the basic idea of this plant. And it's been known about its medicinal qualities, medicinal, right? Have been known for a very, very long time. So first it was just kind of raw opium. And then toward the 1800s, a German chemist figured that if he could just synthesize it a little bit, then he would give all the rich benefits without the side effects. And he came up with something called morphine. And morphine is a very important drug when it comes to people who are suffering with intense pain. And you give them some morphine and they feel better, right? But can you get addicted to morphine? You sure can, right? So growing poppies, which is for opium, is it a good thing or a bad thing? It depends how you look at it. Depends what you're using it for, because it can certainly be used as a blessing. Morphine can be a blessing. Now, then later on, another German company, the Bayer company, they later synthesized, or they bought another variation of opium, which was known as heroin. And that was, it's going to be the next miracle drug, right? And so people were growing this. It was going to be a miracle drug. But of course, it proved very, very addictive. And so they had to stop using them. But during the time that they thought it was a great thing, was it a sin to grow that? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. Now, as the clock continues, we fast forward, we have opioids. Now, are opioids a good thing or a bad thing? Well, if you are in massive pain, let's say that you're on your deathbed, okay, and it's too late, we can't save you, but we can give you lots of medicine to make your passing a lot easier. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think that's a nice thing. Can it be used for evil? Certainly. We've had an opium epidemic in this country, but it's the same drug that's being used. It's the same substance that's being used, but it can be used for good or it can be used for evil. When we think about marijuana, there are people that are greatly benefited from marijuana because they have chronic pain. Now, look, I don't have chronic pain, so I really can only guess what it's like to have chronic pain. I've had times in my life where I've had some extreme pain, and and those were pretty crazy times, but they were short. I cannot imagine having chronic severe pain all the time. I just can't imagine it, because I've never lived through that. But if I did, and just if I try to put myself in that for just a moment, and remembering the kind of pain that I've experienced just from migraine headaches, would I want something to lessen that? I probably would. And if I were convinced through the literature and the research that marijuana could help me in that way, I might consider using it. But again, I don't, thank God, I don't have to live with those kind of conditions to be in that sort of situation. So so that's the question here concerning your question. Is it a sin to grow marijuana? I don't think it's a sin to grow marijuana. I think it's a sin to misuse marijuana, just like it's a sin to misuse opium or any other substance for that matter. If you think about the Inca Indians in South America, they used to chew cocaine all the time. Not cocaine, but the coca leaf. And it kind of gave them these superpowers. I mean, they could remember long phrases, and they could run vast distances without getting tired. And so it was really an incredible substance. But then they often died early too, because they sort of used all their battery up at once. But again, was it a sin to do that? I don't suppose it was. But can the coca leaf be used in a bad way? It most certainly can. And that's what we have to look at. It's not just the substance, it's how it's going to be used. Now, with cannabis, we certainly know that it's becoming legal in many states, and there will be people that will abuse it, no question. But can it be used for good purposes as well? I think it can. So, I'm not going to tell you if you should take the job or not, but those are some of the things that you should just consider when applying for this job. That certainly growing marijuana has great potential to be used in a wrong way, just as opium can and has been used in a wrong way. But on the other hand, it also has been used for very good benefits, and it's actually helped a lot of people. So that's the real challenge, I think. And sugar is no different. Beer is really no different. Really, anything that we can eat, we can always binge on a certain food or substance, and then it can do us harm. Even drinking too much water. If you drink gallon after gallon after gallon of water, you could actually die because you've saturated your cells with water. And so you drown yourself by drinking too much water. So it's how you use it, not the substance itself. Thanks for that great question. That's a good one. Okay, let me see here. I think I have time for one more question, then I'm going to have to wrap it up. Okay. The English translation of above. Hola, soy de Venezuela. Quisiera saber cuál es la diferencia entre guardar las fiestas y observar las fiestas hebreas. Well, I don't know if I should answer that in Spanish or in English. Probably English, since I think most of my crowd is in English. But the question is, I'm from Venezuela, and I want to know what is the difference between keeping the feast and observing the Hebrew feast. There really is no difference. I don't think that you can find a difference between them. The Hebrew feasts, God says, are His feasts. That's in Leviticus chapter 23. He calls them His feasts. So they're Hebrew or Hebraic in the sense that they're found in the Hebrew Bible, and the Hebrew people have been the ones who have kept these. But I believe that these are God's feasts, and I think He wants everybody to keep them. In fact, He says in Isaiah 56 and 58 that if the foreigner will keep these, he'll be blessed. If he keeps the Sabbath, he'll be blessed. So I think that we really can find a great difference. We can find a great blessing in keeping God's feasts. I don't think there is a difference between keeping them and observing them. Well, if you're observing them, then you're keeping them, right? It's not just that it's on your calendar. Oh yeah, today is that day, and you do nothing about it. It's not just to know that it's that day, but it's actually to celebrate the day, right? So it's kind of like the 4th of July. I mean, we all know the 4th of July comes every year, right? It's on the calendar, 4th of July, right? Independence Day. But are you keeping it? Are you observing it, right? And quite frankly, probably most of us are not. We're eating hot dogs and doing fireworks, but we're not really observing the Day of Independence. So We want to keep God's feasts because they're fun. They're a blessing. They have great value and significance. They remind us of what is important to God's on God's calendar. So I hope that's good. Okay, I got one time for one more, and I'm going to stop. This is from Carmen. She says, "Can you please explain how, if the unclean laws still apply today? That is, for example, unclean discharges, skin diseases, childbirth, dead bodies, etc." Well, it's it kind of goes back to when we were kids and we talked about somebody having cooties, right? What are cooties? Cooties, that's just a kid word for germs. Do we still have germs today? We most certainly do. If you go to a hospital, you're have a higher chance of catching some of those germs because sick people have germs. We all have germs, but some germs are harmful for us. Germs we now know today are essentially bacteria. It could be a virus of sorts, but often we just think about bacteria. That's why it's important to wash our hands, right? Because after you use the bathroom, you should wash your hands. And it amazes me how many people, at least men, I always use the men's room, but that will use the bathroom and they will not wash their hands. And I'm like, ooh, that's kind of nasty. Why? Because, this stuff gets on your hands and you should go and wash them. Because after that, you might go and shake somebody's hand. After that, you might go eat something. And what happened in the bathroom can then be taken to shake the hand of your friend or to your food or whatever you do next. Or you touch a bunch of stuff and then people come and touch it. And that's how we spread disease, right? That's how we spread germs. So what the Bible is talking about is unclean. Just think of it just as that. It's unclean. Unclean means it's not clean, right? It's dirty. It's got germs. And back then, of course, they couldn't see these things. They didn't know about the whole bacterial world, and they didn't know anything about germ theory and all this different stuff that we now know today because we have microscopes and we've looked at this for about 400 years, and we know what's going on in there. And we can see when a disease spreads, and it's often bacterial. That a bacteria will spread from here to over there, and we know that, right? This is kind of just basic science nowadays. But back then they didn't have that, and so God didn't go into a full explanation of the theory of the microscopic world. He just said, "Look, just wash your hands, okay? And there's some things you shouldn't go near, like a dead body." Look, I mean, some people have to go and get the dead body, but I hope they wash their hands after they've touched the dead body, because dead bodies, there's a high chance that they're dead because they had some kind of a disease, right? And as that body decays, the disease is still there. It's in there. Now you have rotting flesh. Yeah, it's kind of nasty stuff, right? That's just basic unclean. When a woman has a monthly period, there's blood coming out of her body. Guess what? Blood is considered a biological hazard. That's why when you go in a hospital and it says biohazard, right? And they put on gloves and stuff, right? Because the blood can communicate disease. It can communicate the different, whether it's bacteria, virus, or whatever, that can be communicated through the blood. And so that's why doctors and nurses and hospital people have to take great care to wear gloves, wash their hands, contain those things so that we do not spread disease. And I really believe that is at the heart of all of these unclean, call them unclean laws. It's to contain disease, to keep it from spreading. So you can have that in skin diseases. I think that should be pretty obvious. That's incredibly infectious. With childbirth, certainly there's bodily fluids that have come out, and those bodily fluids can contain different things. I understand, all that comes out. But again, anytime you have that, there can be a communication of disease, and it can go both ways, right? It can go from the mother out. It can also go from others to the mother and to the child. So this is just many of the reasons why these laws are still good. They're still good, and we want to appreciate them for what they were, what God would have us do, and to be wise in this. So Great question, Carmen. I think that really is a good one. And, it's just still the reality is that we have disease in our world and we need to be wise about it. So thank you guys for tuning in. This has been a fun 2 hours to go through your questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them. I always try to get to all of your questions, but I just ran out of time. So if I didn't get to it, just put it on a little sticky note and get it to me next time. One of these weeks, I'm going to get Michael Heiser. He actually agreed to be on. And then I had some of the problems with Google Hangouts not working anymore. So now I now have this thing called StreamYard. It seems to be working pretty good. I'm happy about that. If you're in town in Denver and you want to join us on Sabbath, please do. We have a great time every Shabbat at the Way Congregation. So go to thewaycongregation.com and you can get all the information about that. If you want to help support this financially, that would be a huge blessing. I don't have a sugar daddy. I don't have a trust fund. And so if you want to help with this, you can go to my Patreon page. Really, it's a huge blessing, guys. I do appreciate that. If you tune in to the Way Congregation and you want to help support the ministry of the Way as we make disciples and we try to become better disciples, you can give through our Tithely button there on the Way Congregation. Guys, until next time, stay in the Word. God's Word is transforming. It teaches us, it guides us, it completes us, and you never get to the end of it. That's the amazing part of it. Till next time, God bless.